Good morning, everyone. I am Brian Sonstein, joined once again with Kevin Gosztola. We are from Shadowproof. Kevin has been up as usual since the break of dawn, covering Julian Assange's extradition hearing in London. Today we had some big witnesses. Kevin, I know you were very busy trying to keep up on Twitter. Why don't you fill us in with what happened today? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yep,
There
sorry.
you go.
There's just a little blip in my. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for following like always. Today was a big day. We concluded with testimony from Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg. Of course, very renowned, respected. His testimony was critical, but before I get into his testimony, let's first start with the witness in the morning, who I still view as a very crucial witness, but I expect that everything that he said is going to be totally upstaged by Daniel Ellsberg, unfortunately. And the legal team actually set him up as a witness who could help reinforce testimony from Khalid El-Masri, who is a victim of CIA rendition and torture, who successfully mounted one of the few challenges in the European Court of Human Rights to his treatment and won a settlement against Macedonia for their role in his abduction by the CIA. He was held in the salt pit, this prison in Afghanistan. And I understand that Gina Haspel, the CIA director, has some connection to that facility. John Goetz is an investigative journalist for Der Spiegel and had done a lot of work on this, even going to North Carolina to try to track down the people who were involved in this operation that targeted Khalid. It was a case of, as the government claims, mistaken identity. They did not actually get the right person they were trying to capture or subject to this abuse. And yet still, we don't get any acknowledgement from the U.S. government that what they did is wrong. And that continues to this day. And so an aspect of this case throughout, and I apologize, or I have no control over the massive jet that is flying over my head. But a thing that's been constant throughout is this focus on the crimes that were exposed by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks that showed that the U.S. government was engaged in conduct that was embarrassing, that they tried to thwart any accountability for, and that this plays some part in bringing the prosecution against Julian Assange because they feel that it is an attack to force them to be subject to accountability. And so John Goetz took the stand and he made a connection between his reporting on Khalid El-Masri. He talked about the cables that he was able to read as a result of WikiLeaks doing this work. And he put together a story based on them and learned why, to his bafflement, that the Munich state prosecutor had issued arrest warrants for the people involved in abducting and torturing El-Masri, but it was not served against the jurisdiction in which these people are from, the United States. So it was always a mystery as to why this was being done in this manner. And then he could tell from the cables that, in fact, there was immense pressure put on the German government to not allow accountability to break out in Germany. That was the case in Spain as well in relation to torture investigations that Balthazar Garzón wanted to pursue. And Balthazar Garzón is one of Assange's legal team. So he was a very crucial witness. Another element of John Goetz's testimony was to talk about the way in which he worked with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks on these publications and undermine the constant claim by the government that there was recklessness on the part of WikiLeaks, that they caused to be published names of informants and put people at risk, that they somehow have blood on their hands, as we've heard from the U.S. government for numerous years now. And also this has made its way into press accounts. And so he showed that they were involved in every step of the process, cared about security. They even reached out to the State Department and the Defense Department to ask for help with redactions. The Defense Department, of course, wanted to have nothing to do with WikiLeaks. A fascinating bit that came from John Goetz was this meeting in which they were going over the U.S. state embassy cables, and in fact, officials were giving them numbers of cables and saying, these are ones that we have concerns about publishing, and then those journalists were going to look them up and realizing that these were just politically sensitive stories that they didn't want to have covered in the media. So it seemed that it wasn't just all about protecting the names of sensitive sources. And then, abruptly the officials stopped doing this as they realized that they were sort of giving these journalists a roadmap to what would have the most impact if they were going to want to put out the most effective stories on these cables. So John's a really important person. He knows what happened with the cables. He knows that the unredacted cables were not published recklessly by WikiLeaks, that in fact they were released and published by David Lee. As a result of David Lee publishing this password in a book that he co-authored with Luke Harding about WikiLeaks, that encrypted file was no longer under the control of WikiLeaks, and that it was compromised because that password was able to crack that file. And then at that point, it disrupted all the plans that WikiLeaks had. We heard from John Goetz that they had plans to do another year of reporting on the cables, country-specific reporting. I believe there's a documentary out there called Media Stand that people could go watch if they want to see this part of the story, where they were going, country by country, working on these cables with journalists in those countries to have an impact in reporting on these materials. And then that was cut off. Those plans were entirely disrupted by what happened. So it removes this idea that there's any motive for WikiLeaks to just put all the cables online without any sort of editorial judgment or without any sort of project surrounding it.
Thanks, Kevin. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Dan Ellsberg's
So
testimony?
in the afternoon, we came back. There was quite a bit of break time. They were trying to work out a way to work in some more witnesses, but part of the problem was the objection to Khalid al-Masri's statement. I do want to make sure I mention that. There was an objection to Khalid al-Masri's statement being read into the record. We don't know what the judge is going to do with that, but we do know that on a day that the defense team was ready to have that read into the record and for that to be presented to us at the same time that we heard John Goetz's testimony, that we didn't get it. And so that sort of undermines the media's ability to cover it. I think, in my view, I'm going to wait to cover the Khalid al-Masri aspects in a written report and come back to it, because I see what was being done and I understand the value of being able to share this with people all together. So the written report I do will probably be about Ellsberg, much like most of the mass media. I expect them to really focus on Ellsberg, but he deserves the focus, and he did a really good job. And he did so in spite of the fact that this is a man who is clearly losing his hearing. It was difficult for him to be a witness. It required a lot of patience on the part of those who were in the courtroom. He's in his late 80s. He's been around for a very long time, though, and you can't not call him to be a part of this process, because he has been an advocate and a supporter of Assange, and he has a lot of credibility, and he blows apart a lot of the U.S. government's myths about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and what are good leaks and what are bad leaks. And he even spoke directly about this narrative crafted around him that he's, good Ellsberg and then there's bad Assange, or that there's bad Chelsea Manning, or there's bad Edward Snowden, and that somehow what he's done is different. He even challenged Floyd Abrams, a New York Times contributor who has written about this, who was a lawyer, who was involved in the civil case with the Pentagon Papers, who has said that WikiLeaks is not the same as what Daniel Ellsberg did with the Pentagon Papers. And Ellsberg flatly rejects that. So the defense had him and set him up to present some of his basic ideas and thoughts about these materials, the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs. Again, I apologize for the ambient noise. These are the sounds of Chicago. And he talked about Assange's political opinions, which is something important, again, to this extradition case, because that's one way that Assange might be able to prevent being extradited, to prove that he's being targeted for his political opinions. And Ellsberg shared very briefly meeting with him in London and having a conversation about government transparency and the way that we are lied to when we hear statements about military affairs or foreign policy and what that is like. And they both agreed, they had the same kind of view about what needs to change and what is wrong about the U.S. government. And so those are political opinions. And we heard from Dan Ellsberg about the trial and the prosecution of him and how he was not able to share his intent in the courtroom. This is something he's spoken about before, but in this context, it's even more crucial to recall that Daniel Ellsberg was not able to share his motive for revealing the documents, why he released the Pentagon Papers to the media. And that would be the same in Julian Assange's case today. That's why he said Julian Assange cannot receive a fair trial if he is brought to the United States, because like him, he would not be able to say why he chose to publish this material. And then the prosecutor came up and was able to have his time questioning Daniel Ellsberg. He tried to do a tactic that has been done previously, which is to suggest that one, when the collateral murder video came up, that the collateral murder video had nothing to do. I'm just going to pause for a moment and let this stop. I believe it will stop in just a moment, but I'm not going to try to talk over it.
Hey, this is just live streaming, I guess. This is the way it goes.
I come out because it's nice, and I figure the scenery is a respite from a lot that's happening in the world with the wildfires and the fact that this case is just terrible, and a lot of people feel powerless, like they can't stop it. And we still have sunlight, and it's kind of gorgeous out here. But apparently someone has laid on the panic button of their car.
Hey, there we go.
All right. So let's get back to what matters here, which is the Ellsberg testimony. And the prosecutor, he was trying to find a way into contesting and challenging Daniel Ellsberg. And ultimately, he found his way to, one, suggesting that the collateral murder video, which Daniel Ellsberg did give some opinions about when he was cross-examined by the defense, he said, well, Julian Assange is not actually charged with disclosing or he's not charged with publishing the collateral murder video. And Daniel Ellsberg was smart enough to know that might be true, that charges 15, 16, and 17 don't go to that. There are specific charges for specific documents, but there are more general charges that go after obtaining and receiving the classified information from the U.S. government. And so the collateral murder video was one of those files provided to WikiLeaks in the same cache of documents that Chelsea Manning was prosecuted over. Logic suggests that collateral murder video could play some part. It is possible that they could bring it in sentencing and use it as aggravating evidence to go after Julian Assange, even if it isn't in the indictment itself. So it does matter to the extradition. And so as we continue to hear sounds of planes, trains, and automobiles surrounding me, I continue on to the fact that they had a conversation, a big exchange over whether there was harm caused by WikiLeaks, and possibly one of the more crucial aspects of what happened with the testimony. Because Daniel Ellsberg can't hear very well, because it was hard to go back and forth, this played out in two ways. One, it created a dynamic where the prosecutor was reluctant to cut off Daniel Ellsberg. So he was able to say a lot of testimony that I think other witnesses would not have been permitted to say. And he was given leeway because of his age. And I think that was to the benefit of the defense team, at least as far as coverage of what happened in these proceedings go. But on the other hand, that meant that James Lewis decided to read almost, I felt like an entire page, if not 2 pages, of this affidavit submitted by the assistant U.S. attorney, Gordon Kromberg, about what the government sees as the evidence that harm was caused by WikiLeaks. And it doesn't amount to much. There's not a whole lot of proof there. There's a lot of conjecture, but he read it out in its entirety. And then he said something to Daniel Ellsberg like, now, how can you, in an unbiased manner, insist that this did not cause any grave harm, that the WikiLeaks disclosures did not have any grave impact whatsoever? And Ellsberg called the government cynical in the way that it's talking about all of these names that were allegedly revealed, all these people that were allegedly exposed to harm. He insisted that the U.S. government has had contempt for Middle Easterners in the region for a long time, that they really don't care about these people, that they just care about their well-being because it is necessary for this prosecution. It makes this prosecution go more smoothly to act like they care about the populations of these countries. And you know, in the context of all the harm that's been done, the 37 million people who have been turned into refugees from these wars, I mean, whatever WikiLeaks is accused of doing simply pales in comparison. It probably barely charts in comparison to the carnage that the U.S. government is responsible both in Afghanistan and in the Middle East. And that was a very good point to make, I think, to contextualize what the U.S. government is trying to say here about Julian Assange. But then also, Ellsberg did a good job of making it clear that Julian Assange tried to get the State Department and Defense Department to care about the informants that were in there. There's actually a video of Julian Assange on the phone with the State Department panicking over what may happen next now that that file that was encrypted has been compromised, and he's telling the State Department, you need to do something now to protect these people. And he's not able to get on the phone to Hillary Clinton or anyone that he thinks could meaningfully use their leadership to take action. So they didn't work with him. And actually, Ellsberg very clearly said, yeah, I believe that the State Department and the Defense Department bear some responsibility for anything that maybe possibly happened to these people. There is no evidence of death, but the anxiety, the fact that they maybe had to leave their countries because they could no longer live there since they were now linked to the U.S. government. I mean, that's on the State Department and the Defense Department, who refused to take the opportunity to protect these people. They knew no matter what, this material was going to be published, and they didn't go through a standard process that we all know as journalists exists. And he mentioned that it happened with the Snowden documents. Edward Snowden's documents with The Intercept, and The Intercept's taken quite a bit of flack for going through this, but they talked with officials at the NSA to protect them, and simply these agencies refused to go through that because they didn't want to treat WikiLeaks like it was a legitimate media operation. So all of this testimony, I think, really good to get on the record, important for the judge to hear. And I'm glad that Daniel Ellsberg was still around to be able to provide this testimony in this extradition proceeding. Oh, and that he was healthy enough to be able to do it. And he got up very, very early. When we heard this testimony, it was before 7 a.m. in the morning that he had tuned in. His son was graciously helping him deal with the video link that was necessary to provide the testimony. I think the Assange legal team is very fortunate to have Ellsberg in their corner, supporting them and able to provide this crucial testimony.
Definitely agree with that. Is there any other highlights from today that you wanted to point to, or do you want to tell us a little bit about what's to come next?
Yeah, so tomorrow we're going to have Kerry Shankman, who's going to talk about the Espionage Act. He's done some work on it. He is, I understand he's in the process of putting together a book that will soon be released on the history of the Espionage Act and how it's been applied in courts, and its legal development and some of how Congress has dealt with the law. But he's going to take the stand. He was someone who worked with Michael Ratner, who was a Center for Constitutional Rights director, huge advocate for WikiLeaks, warned way ahead of time before any of this happened that Julian Assange was going to be targeted for extradition by the U.S. government. Tragically, he's no longer with us to be around as a voice. But Kerry Shankman is someone from his circle that can continue in the tradition that Michael Ratner championed when it came to constitutional rights and the law. So he's going to be testifying. And there's one other witness I did not recognize. I'll have to leave that a mystery until tomorrow when I have familiarized myself with that person and when they take the stand. But there's also been some confusion. I'll wrap with this point, which is there's been a little bit of confusion over what to do with witnesses who it was agreed upon that their evidence could just be read into the record. But now it's not clear that there's still agreement over those witnesses, or it's not clear what to do with those witnesses' testimony. And it's not clear that the public is going to know what that testimony is when it is entered into the record. And so they're trying to untangle it. Potentially we were going to hear from Jennifer Robinson, who's on the Assange legal team, about the alleged pardon offer that Trump made to Julian Assange. And then it was messy and we just didn't get to that in the afternoon. And there's still some disagreement over what to do with that. So that's just an example of some of the case issues that are unfolding in the courtroom here. Once again, thank you for all the support. I could not do this without you. There's the Dissenter newsletter. I shared the link in the Day 7 thread today. So if you would like to get written reports in your inbox, you can just go subscribe, dissenter.substack.com/subscribe. I'll have a report later, hopefully, but later in the day. I'm going to go take a little bit of a nap probably. But once I've had a chance to refresh and go do some more work on this, I'll get this report out to you for Day 7, likely covering Ellsberg. And you can also read from other people. I mean, Consortium News is doing some fantastic work on this. There are some other people who I'll make a point of showing solidarity with through the rest of these proceedings, and they've been supportive of my work as well. And then here at Shadowproof, you can give to us for investing the time and energy. And thank you to Brian for interrupting your day and helping me do this live update.
Yeah, of course. I think that's a great place to leave it. Just make sure you're subscribed to Kev's newsletter. Follow him on Twitter. Chip in if you can at shadowproof.com/donate. And I hope everyone out there watching has a great rest of your